The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day, I'm Joe Doolittle, and this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit. I'm Kate Dudding.
And we're storytellers, and we're here to kind of share the world of storytelling, and we have a wonderful guest featured storyteller.
Super wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, they've all been wonderful, but super, super, super wonderful from afar.
But that'll be a little bit later. We want to kind of just share a little bit about storytelling because we're all storytellers. And sometimes when you have an understanding of a little bit of the method, it might make your storytelling a little bit more fun.
So, Joe, what have you done this past month interesting to do with storytelling?
Well, you're not going to believe this, but what I did that was the most fun was I stood on the corner and I told stories.
The corner of what?
Cucumber Alley and Washington Avenue in downtown Schenectady in the historic stockade.
Okay.
It was during the stockade walkabout, when they have the open houses and gardens and things. And I like to tell the stories about my hometown, Schenectady. So they had me set up right on the corner, and Cucumber Alley is named that way because it was kind of a garden, and it looks not very big, like maybe a cucumber. And Washington Avenue is one of the main streets just next to the Historical Society. Two big pictures of the old days, and I just kind of started to tell stories. People went by and they'd stop and we'd talk, and then they'd go on and another group would come by, and it was just, it's really what I like to do.
Do you have your street performer's license?
Do you need a street performer's license?
I guess if you weren't collecting money, no.
Well, money I didn't get, but I don't know. But anyway, that was it, and that whole area is such a vibrant place, and the residents there do so much for just the city of Schenectady.
And Washington Avenue used to be the main street in Schenectady.
Right.
And do you know why so many of the houses there date back to before the American Revolution?
Because they're old.
Because they're old. Maybe I should have phrased the question better. Well, we'll just move along. I took a tour there once, and they said most towns, old buildings, they tear down to do the newest things. But the center of Schenectady changed to the Erie Canal, which is 4 blocks away from the Washington Avenue. So all the new construction was there. They didn't bother with that old stuff.
In 1826, they made the stockade neighborhood into a suburb, if you will, because they moved the source of business over 4 blocks east. Yeah, that's true. The other thing that happened down there is right at Cucumber Alley were a whole bunch of docks and a boat works. And before the Erie Canal, that was the place where they built bateaux, they called Durham boats, and that was the vehicle of commerce on the Mohawk River and all that stuff. So there's been a lot going on in downtown Schenectady for a long time. It's a great story. So what have you been doing?
Well, I have had the great pleasure of having one of the best storytellers in the country and in the world staying at my home, where I can learn from her and spend time with her and spend time with a bunch of other storytellers who are working on developing new stories.
So you had a nationally known storyteller in your home with a bunch of other storytellers.
Yes. And then a house concert just last night.
Wow.
Yes, so very, very intimate story. That room in my house has a certain aura to it.
Did you have to post bail or anything like that? No, I'm sorry.
No, that's for you, Joe.
Oh, I'm
not
sorry,
for
I'm sorry.
Joe says, and good luck, and if you need bail, give me a call.
That's right,
But
that's right.
no, Elizabeth isn't like that. And she is with us today.
She is with us today, and it's a charming, wonderful thing to have.
All the way from Dallas, Texas, Elizabeth Ellis. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to get to be here with you.
Now, Elizabeth, you have a very distinctive accent or turn of phrase.
I don't have an accent. You have an accent.
Okay, let me just. Maybe our accents are different.
Yes.
It's our accents different.
Yes, definitely they're different.
But
But I like hers better.
yeah, I think I do
Yeah.
too. I'd like to mimic her, but I can't figure out whether it's exactly what I think a Texan accent ought to be, or whether it's some other accent.
Elizabeth, where does your wonderful accent, where do other people speak like you do?
I'm not sure that a lot of people speak like I do. I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, but I have lived in Texas long enough for the Texas twang to take some of the edge off the Appalachian accent that I grew up with. So it's a combination of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Texas. And if there are other people who speak like I do, it's because they've had those same experiences.
So, another way in which Elizabeth Ellis is probably unique.
Very unique. And I've learned so much just listening to you tell. I think that's the other thing. I love the accent or the way you speak, but I'm amazed at some of the things that when you told at the concert last night, you kind of leave a tidbit in the middle of the story, and then you wind up using the tidbit to close. And it's all of a sudden, and it becomes a surprise, and you also know that the story's over. It's really, and did you study that? I mean, how does that happen when you do those kinds of things?
Well, I've been lucky enough to grow up in a house full of storytellers when I was a child. My grandfather and my aunt were storytellers. I've been interested in storytelling all my life, so I keep watching what storytellers do. And you watch and you see what's effective, and then you go, oh, I could do that. If that works for someone else, it would work for me. I could do that. So it's mostly a process of observation and imitation.
Oh, I forgot to mention, it's not just our opinion that Elizabeth is so special, but that she has received not one, but 2 prestigious awards from the National Storytelling Network, which is the professional organization for storytellers in this country. She has received the Circle of Excellence Award, and there are probably maybe 3 dozen people, 3 dozen people who have that award. And then, 10, 12 years later, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award, which is a much smaller club. So, lots of people have experienced and appreciated her work.
I was really worried about getting the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Why were you worried?
I was concerned that there was something my doctor wasn't telling me.
Well,
It makes you a little nervous
Well, yes.
when someone starts talking about lifetime achievement.
I think Steven Spielberg got from the American Film Association or something when he was in his early 50s, and he goes, I'm not done.
Yeah, that's
I'm
pretty
not
much
done.
the way I felt. Yeah, when I came home from receiving it, I looked at the roof of my house to see if there were any buzzards sitting up there. Yeah.
Growing up in a family that tells stories is one way of observing and learning, but somewhere along the way you made a decision to become a professional storyteller.
That's true.
And that's a little different demarcation point. Can you tell us a little bit how that happened?
Well, I was working at the Dallas Public Library as a children's librarian. I was spending a lot of time telling stories for the library. the National Storytelling Festival was happening in East Tennessee. And I decided that I wanted to go, and I thought it would be nice if the library helped me do that. But I was really shy about asking for any grant money for doing it or travel money for doing it because it was so close to where I'd grown up. I thought that people might say, well, you're just trying to pay for a free trip home to visit. But my boss said, what makes you think people remember where you came from? Oh, there's
Did
that.
they listen to you?
There's
I
that.
don't know, right?
Yeah. So I went to the National Storytelling Festival with my old friend Gail Ross, and we had a wonderful time. I could barely get myself back in the car to go home. Going home, the litany was, we could do that. We could do that, we could do that, we could do that. About the time we got to the bridge across the Mississippi River, we could do that, turn to, I'll do it if you'll do it, I'll do it if you'll do it, I'll do it if you'll do it. It's funny to think about it now, but I really believe the people that Gail and I were then, neither one of us would ever have done it alone. There was a great comfort and power to having a buddy you could jump off cliffs with, sort of a la Butch and Sundance. You
Or
know?
Thelma and Louise is what I mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've never seen that movie, but I was thinking of, the fall will probably kill you.
Who cares that you can't swim?
Right, exactly. So we went back to Dallas and resigned our respective jobs and hung out our shingle as professional storytellers after going to the National Festival.
Boy, oh boy. That's amazing. I mean, that just happened. Is there something about the Mississippi River and crossing over that precipitates decisions in your life? I mean, does that happen often?
Well, I do think it's a very monumental and momentous thing to get to cross the Mississippi River. We get to do it with such ease now. I'm always stunned by it, its breadth, the danger, and what the stories must be of all the people in the past who tried to make that crossing, from the people who crossed during the Trail of Tears and so many drowned, pioneers who going west who crossed. It always catches me up short. It makes me stop and think every time I cross the Mississippi River. And its waters are really the mother of our country. Without it, we wouldn't be here, really. It sustains our country. So it seems like a kind of sacred thing in a way.
You know, I have to stop because I asked that question with some intention because I was curious. I was curious about how many nubs of stories that Elizabeth would develop from observing herself and life while she crossed the Mississippi River. And if you think back over that, it's remarkable. I stopped counting at 7. But, and that's the power of having a curious, inquiring, an observant presence that harvests things. And you obviously had those things sorted and stored somewhere, and they became part of your response to life, which is really what your stories are, I think. And that's just remarkable. I could stand in the corner of Cucumber Alley in Washington Avenue and spin a few yards, but I don't know that I have that power of observation.
Well,
I suspect that you do.
yeah, I think so, and you could get better at it now that you're really conscious of it.
Well, yeah, that's another thing about being around you, Elizabeth. I'm a little bit more conscious about what I see.
We always find what we're looking for. It's kind of like, I never realized there were so many little foreign silver-colored cars on the road till I had a little silver foreign-colored car. If your car's white, you begin to notice all the other white cars on the road. When you begin to open your mind to the idea that life is a story, and that we actually swim in an ocean of stories. We do the backstroke in an ocean of stories every day. You start thinking, well, that little piece right there. Donald Davis, who is a very well-known storyteller, says, that little quilt scrap right there, don't throw it away, just save it. You don't know where it's going to go yet, but just save it. What you observe, how you see the world, everybody you encounter has stories.
That's right.
And if you are open to them and listening for them, they appear almost immediately. Everybody from the story of the school teacher who really wanted to be something else very dramatic, but that those doors were not open to her because her parents were ill, and how she stayed the course of taking care of them. And after their death, since she was in her 40s already, thought her prospects for marriage were not so good, so she began to do some research and ended up moving to Alaska because there were more men than women there, and she thought she would improve her chances of marriage. And then sent us postcards, and then the wedding announcement, and then even the birth announcement.
Ooh.
Yeah, really. So everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a story. And it can be exchanged while you're standing in line at the supermarket waiting to check out, in the dentist office, riding on the bus.
I tell my stories to dentists all the time, and they still stick the Novocaine in and do the work.
That's right, and tell you to keep your mouth open and be quiet. Yes.
Yes. But enough about your dentist. Would you tell us a story, please, Elizabeth?
I'd be happy to. We've been talking about personal life experiences, so I'll tell that kind of story first. I was sitting in a booth in Columbus, Mississippi with my old friend Betsy Bishop at Denny's. If you're ever out on the road traveling and you get homesick, go to Denny's. They all look alike. You can pretend you're anywhere if you're at Denny's. Even the waitresses all look alike. And Betsy held up the tourist brochure and she said, we've been to every single place on their tourist brochure here in Columbus, Mississippi, except for their historical cemetery. And I said, seems a shame to leave Columbus, Mississippi without being at every place that's on their brochure. After all, they printed it in color. So we got in our car and we went over to the cemetery. You could tell right off it was an old cemetery because it was made for the dead. We don't do that anymore. These days, all cemeteries are made for the convenience of the living. If one of your loved ones dies, you're going to have to buy a marker that fits flush with the ground for the convenience of the man who mows the lawn at the cemetery. But this cemetery was made in the days when people really revered the dead and respected them and didn't worry about convenience. So it was filled with funeral statuary. In fact, it had the most amazing array of funeral statuary I'd ever seen. There were couches made of stone. There were draperies and chairs made of marble. There were depictions of Jesus. It was a Mississippi cemetery. But what caught my eye, the angels. They were everywhere you looked. There were angels sitting and angels kneeling. There were angels standing. There were angels dancing. There were angels playing the harp. There were angels playing the trumpet. There were angels playing the drums. Who knew that heaven had a percussion section? And my friend Betsy said, you choose an angel to be your angel, and I'll be choosing an angel to be my angel. And I said, all right, we do those kinds of things. And we kept walking back into the cemetery. After we'd walked quite a ways, Betsy said, that's my angel. It was a little angel. sitting on the ground, feeding a lamb, looked just like Betsy, the angel, not the lamb. And Betsy said, "Where's yours?" I said, "I haven't seen her yet." And we just kept walking back through the cemetery. We were reading the names off the tombstones, those old names that you don't hear much anymore. I wondered whatever happened to all those women named Beulah and all those men who inherited family names like Chiselworth, and wondered what he was really called when he was still living. Surely nobody had to go through life being called Chiselworth every day as a first name. And we walked and walked and walked. I spotted her from quite some distance away. She was in the middle of a family plot, and like a lot of other Southern family plots, all those graves were surrounded by a little white picket fence. This particular angel, I'd never seen anything like her. She had thrown herself on one of the graves, prostrate in her grief. I looked at her and I said, "That's my angel." It almost looked to me like her marble shoulders were still shaking. My mother had only been dead a few weeks. Betsy said, "She looks just like you." I lifted my eyes to the right, and I realized I had been wrong about the idea that we were reaching the end of the cemetery, that there was an entire area of the cemetery that went far, far back. But the tombstones on those graves didn't look like the ones that we had passed. Instead of this amazing array of statuary on these graves, every single marker was exactly alike. Shiny white marble, pointed at the top, a traditional shape. And the inscription on each of those markers was just exactly the same. Unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier. So it disappeared out of sight over the brow of the hill. I looked to the left. There I saw an equal number of tombstones, not the white marble ones. These were dark gray, the traditional domed shape, and on them each marker with the same inscription: unknown Union dead, 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 till they too disappeared over the brow of the hill. It took my breath away. Just then, the caretaker of the cemetery came tootling up on his little three-wheel cart, and he wanted to know if we'd found the grave we were looking for. He was certain that we were there for some kind of genealogy project. We told him we weren't looking for any grave in particular, that we just liked to go to cemeteries. And he gave us such a look. And then he followed my line of sight toward those matching graves. And he said, "Breathtaking, isn't it?" I said, "Yes." "Where did they come from?" He said, "You're standing with your feet in the state of Mississippi, but you're really only 3 stops down the train track from the Battle of Shiloh. I guess they buried the men with names at the first 2 stops." "Do you know," he said, "more men died in 2 days at the Battle of Shiloh than died in all the wars that America had participated in total up to that time?" I said, "No, I had no idea." "It's true," he said. I said, "How many are there?" 55 acres. 55 acres of bodies without names. He says to me, "You know, everything's got a website these days. You go home, you could sit down in front of your computer and you'd see that Memorial Day has its own website. And on that, it's going to tell you that some fancy Union general decided about 1868 or 9 that there should be a day that would be set aside to honor the men who fought to defend the Union." They think that that's the beginning of Memorial Day, but the people here in Columbus, Mississippi, we know better. The war was still going on when the women of Columbus decided to come and decorate the graves of all the glorious Confederate dead. Nobody remembers the name of the woman who first said, "But what about those boys over there? Their mothers are so far away." And so the women of Columbus, Mississippi went back to their gardens and they began to cut more flowers. They say they brought them by the wagon load, that you could smell the flowers before you came in sight of the cemetery. And those women didn't stop until they decorated every grave. Don't you think it's strange that they would be willing to decorate the graves of the men who might have caused the death of their husbands and fathers and brothers and sons? That was really the beginning of Memorial Day here in the United States. You can ask anybody here in Columbus and they'll tell you. He said, "This is really my retirement job, and I got to tell you, it's harder than I thought it was going to be. At the end of the day, I'm just worn out, and I can't wait to get home and flop down in my recliner chair and have a beer. But I always try to stay up late enough to watch the evening news. It worries me. I watch the news and then I come back and I look at all these tombstones. I watch the news and then look at these tombstones. It makes me wonder if anything like this could ever happen again here in the United States. Could American blood ever be shed by other Americans on American soil? I gotta tell you, watching the news really makes me nervous. But if something like that happens, all I really pray for is that when everything's over, someone will step forward and say, "But what about those poor boys? Their mothers, they're so far away."
Whoa, whoa.
And what do you call that, Jem?
Most of my stories have titles like "The Time I Went to the Cemetery with Betsy Bishop." But actually, over the years, since it's needed a more formal title, it's called Friendship Cemetery because that's the actual name of the cemetery. If you Google Columbus, Mississippi, when you get to their home page, as the man told me, everything's got a website these days. You can see some pictures of the grieving angel on their website. She's beautiful. There's a lovely picture that I especially like, looking at her from the back, where you can see the soles of her bare feet, and then her shoulders, the top of her head.
I never thought about what angels might or might not wear on their feet. Sandals, maybe. Golden sandals, maybe.
Well, since they don't need to walk, why would they need shoes?
Good point. Good point.
If you can fly, you probably don't need shoes. Well,
we could.
maybe something on your feet if you were dancing. I don't know. Now, there's a theological discussion we could have. Do angels need shoes when they are dancing?
And they do dance on top of pins. We know that, right?
Yeah,
seen that.
I heard that when I was,
Yeah.
in school I heard that.
We digress. I think we digress. But storytellers can do that on the drop of a hat.
I'd just like to ask a question about the story. It was so vivid when you told it that we were with you and Betsy in the cemetery. But from the time that you were on that trip together to the time that you told that story for the first time, what was the interval and kind of how did it get polished?
Unlike most of my other stories, that tale got told the next day. And a lot of days after that, and the polish came in the telling of the tale, seeing what parts people responded to. I cut away a huge section that didn't have meaning for anybody but me. It occurred to me that it made no difference why we were in Columbus, Mississippi. had been a big elaborate backstory of how we came to be in Columbus, Mississippi. Betsy and I both had the same adopted father figure when we were children. And after Dr. Crowder's death, we realized that we had been every place he had ever lived. Either he had taken us when we were young, or we had taken him when he was old, to every place he had ever lived, except we had never been to Columbus, Mississippi. And so we were there on a kind of pilgrimage to see the place where he had first begun his ministry, the first church he pastored, the place where he had married his wife, and all of that kind of stuff. And we spent a lot of time in the public library going through the old newspapers on, roll in the reels. Look right here, because little town newspapers used to have enormous local news in them. We got to see how the town turned out to go to the train to meet the wife of the new pastor when she first came, described her suit and her corsage that they presented, all the, who hosted the tea and what kind of dainties were, and that was the actual word, the dainties that were served for the reception. I mean, this is Mississippi. It was very, very social, but it was so dear to get all that information and see all of that long after our dear old friend had passed away. So we were. So the first thing I ended up doing after telling it to someone a couple of people, was realizing it didn't matter at all why we were there. Cut to the chase and just tell. So I began, and sometimes if I'm pressed for time, I don't even include being at Denny's and looking at the tourist brochure. We're just at the cemetery. There we go.
But have you ever done a program of your Dr. Crowder stories?
I haven't ever done an entire program.
Yeah.
I usually salt them into programs as a whole, but I certainly could do a marathon, not just a marathon.
Okay, part one, and come back tomorrow for part two.
He was quite
Or you could have a meal in between.
He was quite a character. He was a Harvard-educated theologian, and how he got to the Appalachian Mountains to be part of my childhood is one of the great mysteries of the modern world from my point of view.
Well, there's another story about that. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous.
Exactly.
But now is the time for us to go to coming attractions.
Fabulous.
Let local folks know what's coming in October. Other than leaves coming down, but you already know that. In storytelling on October 3rd, First Tuesday Tales and Stuff in the historic Stockade, which we mentioned
Right around
earlier.
the corner from Cucumber Alley.
Yes. Arthur's Market and Coffee House will be Sandy Schumann with stories and song.
And that's a simple approach because that's the way Sandy wanted it. He wanted the opportunity to tell stories and sing and play the guitar. So he's the feature. And there'll be opportunities if you show up for you to tell a story or sing a song or read a poem.
Right. It's storytelling, music, and spoken word open mic. So sign up at 6:45, starts at 7. It's free, but there's a collection for the featured performer. More information, call Joe, and we have to put your new number in there, don't we, Joe? Okay. So the new number is what you're seeing now.
518-588-2801.
Yes. We have a little delay between when we tape it and when Greg Grzinski at Colonie Town Library puts the titles in these slides. So thank you, Greg, for all you do, including that. Then on the following Sunday, October 8th, will be our second performance at Word Plays at the Cabaret in the Fort Salem Theater in Salem, New York. Up north and east, stop before you get to Vermont. The title is Catalysts. And this is a series where solo performers tell contemporary and traditional stories celebrating the human spirit. The host is Siri Allison, who has appeared at our table.
Right?
This is our stage. This is our table. And joining her will be people who have all been here. Betty Cassidy, Christy Keegan, Joe, me, Margaret French, Nancy Marie Payne, Kelvin Caraga. And so if you're up that way, Saratoga and beyond, it's a lovely ride along the back hill, isn't it?
The color's going to be just perfect.
Yes. Then, if you want to try storytelling, you could go to the Storytelling Open Mic in Saratoga. In October, it'll be on the 11th at Woodlawn Commons in the Harkness Building. It's part of the Wesley community on Clement Street. It's behind Hospice. And it's free when we're there. Every other month we're in Cafe Lena, where it's a very modest charge of $5. But if you come to Wesley, it's free, and they give you cookies and punch at the end.
Yeah.
Yes. So listeners are welcome. New tellers are welcome. Then on October 7th, usually it's on the second Friday of the month, but this month it's on the first Friday. Joe Doolittle and Claire Nolan will be at the Irish American Heritage Museum on Broadway in Albany for the Shawnee evening of the month. The title is Stories of Irish Families. Tell us a little about that.
Well, Claire and I thought we would lead off with a couple of stories and then turn it into kind of an open mic, because a lot of the folks that come to Shawnee evenings, one, they're Irish, and two, they have their own stories. So we thought we were going to encourage people to share their own stories. And then Claire and I have a little benediction story about families that we'll close with. So it'll be a great time. And there also has a wonderful tradition that one of the board members of the museum makes Irish soda bread. And that's served with hot decaf coffee and rich, creamy Irish gold butter.
Storytelling and food.
That's right.
Storytelling goes with anything, actually, but especially chocolate, in case you're catering an event of mine. Okay. Then on Monday, October 17th, the Interfaith Story Circle program, the local Interfaith Story Circle program started by Gert Johnson, is celebrating its 25th anniversary. It's amazing that it travels from different houses of worship at each month, different topics, and it has proven what Gert had hoped it would do, that people of faith, when they hear each other's stories, they find out how much they have in common. And the different doctrines are not so important. So each program this season that starts from September to June, the power of story. Each month it'll be a different way story is powerful. And in October it will be racial healing, the power of story to build the beloved community. At the Albany Friends meeting at 727 Medicine Avenue in Albany, and the featured teller will be Sandy Powell, who has been working with stories and racial healing for several years with a number of other people. And the title itself is a story, because creating the beloved community has grown out of the Quaker beginning, Stories for Racial Healing, and now involves the Quakers, 4 other Christian congregations, and a Reformed Jewish synagogue. And they're coming together to kind of build this method of building confidence in racial conversation and unity. It's a great program. And so their website, the name of their the parent organization for the Interfaith Story Circle has changed to withourvoice.org. And so for the Interfaith Story Circle program, it's withourvoice.org/IFSC, Interfaith Story Circle. So keep that in mind. And I haven't been very good about doing this chronologically. So back on Sunday, October 15th, but you're flexible, right, is another Catalyst program, but in Schenectady at the Fenimore Gallery in Proctor's. It will be with some of the same tellers that were up in Salem and some not. So it'll be Christy Keegan, Claire Bealstone, Elliot Nieves, Joe, Margaret French, Marnie Gillard, and Sandy Schumann. So another stellar place. And Siri Allison will be there providing refreshments. I guess we almost always feed the people.
We always feed the people.
Yes. Yes.
We have a little guy that shows up with a basket of fish, and he does stuff. I mean,
And then the last thing I'll be talking about is the Story Circle meeting that we'll be having right here. We have a local storytelling guild, which is over 30 years old. And the meeting will be in October, will be on Wednesday, October 18th at the Pine Hills Branch Library in Albany. And we'll start with some sort of learning discussion at 6:15, and then there will be sharing of stories under development, 7 to 9. Telling only, no reading, please. Listeners are very welcome. Raw stories, if this is the first time you'll be telling to human faces, are very welcome. That stories, as Elizabeth said, sometimes they get polished in the telling, and you really need the human feedback, I think, to really polish a story. The nodding of the heads or the confused faces where you go, oh, my family understands that term, but that isn't really a general term.
yeah.
Or whatever, historical background. So that's it for what I know about, oops, no, there's one more. Oh, silly me. On Sunday, October 29th, which will be our 126th Story Sunday, Joe and Jesse Bruchak, a father and son of Abenaki heritage, will be at the Glenn Sanders Mansion telling stories for the moon of falling leaves. Sunday, October 29th, 5 to 8 p.m. And obviously at the Glenn Sanders Mansion, that involves food. You get 4 courses of stories interwoven with 3 courses of food. Reservations required. Joe's phone number.
New phone number.
Yes, I got that one. Yes. No editing needed there. And if you can't come out, or if the new programs on television are not all that you were hoping for, please come to our website, storycircle@proctors.org. We have over 200 stories on demand, mostly filmed in this very studio.
And they're free.
And they're free.
That's right. That's right.
So Elizabeth, speaking of coming attractions, would you tell us about where you're going to be? Not that I think our listeners will be able to come with you, but just to give them a little flavor of what a nationally renowned storyteller does in a month.
I'll be off a few days when I get home. Then I'm going up to Arkansas to tell for a public library gathering there. Then I'm going to Tennessee for the National Storytelling Festival, not as a teller, as a listener this year. I was a featured teller last year, so it's not my turn again. Darn. Then I'm headed up to Seattle to do a weekend workshop with some storytellers. Go over to Port Angeles for the Forest Storytelling Festival, and go home with one of the Canadian tellers who comes there to Vancouver Island to do workshops and house concerts in Victoria and up in Qualicum Bay. And then I'll head back home. That'll be by the beginning of November. I'll do some work in Texas around home, and the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas is usually fairly slow, a time for creating new story and thinking about new work. Of course, right now in Texas, in Dallas, we have thousands of refugees from the Houston disaster and from Beaumont and Lake Charles. So there will be work to do with children, which is, you each answered the question, what have you been doing lately with storytelling? But I wasn't asked that question, so I'll answer telling to people in the shelters that have come to us in Dallas from the disastrous flooding in the south part of our state.
So, what kind of stories do you tell to people who have lost everything and don't know if they have any place to go back to?
Well, I think any story is valuable. In a situation like that, it's no small thing to impart joy. That's a quotation from Bill Harley. No small thing to impart joy. But part of it can just be to give people the opportunity to not be in those crowded, questionable surroundings for the length of time the stories last, to be taken away to someplace beautiful, because one of the things a storyteller gets to do is create beauty in other people's lives. But mostly I like to tell stories in those kinds of situations that have to deal with change and how people have approached change, both people who have had change thrust upon them or people who have chosen to make changes. Sometimes it's helpful if we have some idea of what the choices are, and are the different ways that somebody models for us, the different ways that people can deal with change. Giving people a chance to exercise their imagination. I think it's the greatest gift we have. And the only way we can plan for the future is by utilizing our imagination. So anytime that you are telling a story, no matter what the story's about, you're helping a person become better able to make changes in their life. Because they're exercising those abilities of considering change and how you deal with change. And I actually think that the imagination is our most powerful spiritual gift. How can you interface with a God you can't see or feel or taste or touch without an active imagination?
So it's exercising their imagination and also giving them some models that they can either follow or go, well, if she did that, I could do this. So I don't know.
Folk tales are filled with stories of people who made stupid choices and the result thereof. And it's lovely to give people a chance to laugh and to think about those choices that other people made. It's also filled with stories of people who made really smart choices or people who decided to step forward and make very different lives for themselves. So both in traditional stories and in stories from real life, you find loads and loads of material that would be appropriate for a person who really has some important decisions to make, like, do I go back to Houston or not? It's one of, if I don't go back to Houston, what am I going to do? What's my life going to look like if I stay here? If I go back to Houston, what am I going to do there? Many of the initial people that came to us have already returned to Houston to rip out the carpets in their home and to take out the drywall and to put all their possessions out on the sidewalk for the big trucks to take away, to begin the work of rebuilding their lives. Just some serious decisions to be made.
I think we have about 10 minutes left. Is that right? More or less. So, I believe you have another story for us.
It's an old story.
Okay.
If it sounds familiar, it's because it's such an old story. There was an old king who had 3 daughters. And one time, one by one, he called the girls to him and he said, "What would you have me get for you whenever I go to town?" Well, the oldest girl, she said, "I want a bright, flashing red dress." The middle girl, she said, I want a dark flashing green dress. And the youngest, she said, bring me a dress of solid white. Please, Daddy. Well, the old king went to town and he did up his business, and when he finished, he bought those 3 dresses for his daughters, and he folded them carefully and put them in his saddlebags. And as he rode home, as he was riding down one of those mountain trails, a branch came down low off a maple tree. He's a proud man, too stubborn to bend his head. And so he reached up with his hand and he broke off that maple limb. And when it was broken, it was covered all over in beautiful white roses. Well, that was a great wonder. So the king put it before him on his saddle horn, and he rode home. And when he got there, he called his daughters to him again, and this time he said, how much do you love me? Well, the oldest girl, she said, I love you more than all the gold and jewels in the whole world. But the old king liked her answer. He broke off one of those white roses and laid it on that bright, flashing red dress, handed it to the girl, and she went to make herself ready to go to a dance. And then the middle girl came in. He said, how much do you love me? She said, I love you more than all the husbands and boyfriends I could ever have. That was what she had on her mind. But the king liked her answer too, so he broke off one of those white roses and laid it on that dark flashing green dress, and she went to make herself ready to go to a dance. And then the youngest came in, and she had always been the one that he had loved the best of all, so he was eager to hear her answer. He said, how much do you love me? She said, I don't have an answer for a question like that. I just love you, that's all. He said, no, I want to know. You tell me how much you love me. She said, I just love you. I don't know how to tell you how much. I love you like meat loves salt. What? Said the old king. I love you like meat loves salt. But the king flew into a terrible rage. He grabbed the white dress and he slung it on the ground. He grabbed the girl and dragged her out and locked her up in a high tower where she saw no one except one old woman who cooked for her and brought her water. And there she stayed for a long time. One day, she was sitting in the tower window, combing out her long hair and letting her tears flow down her face. And the Duke of England came riding across the land, and he looked up and saw the girl sitting there in the tower window. I guess there must have been a grapevine growing up the side of that tower, because the Duke took hand to that vine and climbed right up to her window. He brought her out and set her before him on his horse, rode away with her, took ship to England, and there, in his own country, he married her. And the two of them, they lived very happy together. As time went by, the other 2 girls got married as well and went to live with their own husbands. And when the old king grew older and older, when he could no longer care for himself, someone else took the throne, and he was sent to live with the oldest girl. All the beautiful things he brought from his old home, she sold for her own pleasure, so he knew that she didn't really love him. He went to live with the middle girl. Her husband didn't like the old king, and the daughter was ashamed of her father, and she made him eat in the kitchen and sleep among the servants. And in his anger and his pride, the old king wandered away. Nobody cared enough about him to go see where he had gone. As more time went on, those 2 girls' husbands began making a war against the Duke of England. And the Duke brought his troops and his ships and his wife. He came to fight in the war. When his wife reached her own country again, she turned to her husband and she said, I've lived with you for a long time, and we've always been happy together, but I'm pining for the place I used to live when I was a little girl. I want to go and see it again, and after I've seen it, I'll come back to you. When she came to the place where her old home had stood, there was nothing left but a burnt and charred out ruin of a building. But there was her old father, wandering through the ruins, cloudy-headed in his mind. He'd made himself a crown out of blackberry briars he wrapped around his head, and as he walked along, he kept muttering to himself. When the girl saw him there, All the years she spent in the tower fell away from her, and all she saw there was her old daddy who needed her. So she went to him, and although he didn't recognize her, he let her lead him away. She brought him back to her husband, the Duke. And when the war was won, they took ship and sailed once again to England. And there, in her new home, the girl made a beautiful apartment of rooms for her father. She saw that he was never going to want for any kind of good thing. And then one night she went to the kitchen. She said to the cook, "Tonight, when you fix the meal, I want you to fix the meat without a single speck of salt." "I don't want to do that," said the cook. "That's not going to taste right." "You do as you are bidden," said the girl. And so that night, when the meal was put on the table, the king came and sat down, and when he had tasted his food, he dropped his face into his hands and he began to weep bitterly. He said, "I had a daughter, and I asked her how much she loved me. And she said she loved me like meat loves salt. But I was very cruel to her. I didn't even try to understand what the child was telling me. I don't even know what's become of the girl by now." "Father," said the girl. And when the old king raised his face up out of his hands, standing in front of him, holding the salt cellar, there was his youngest girl. And his mind came back to him. He called a servant to him and sent the servant across the ocean water to bring the white dress that he had promised her. And when it was brought, on it there was a spray of beautiful white roses, and they were as fresh and as fragrant as the day that they'd been picked. If the story sounds familiar to you, it was very, very popular when William Shakespeare was alive. Everybody knew the story. He liked the story so much he made a play out of it. It's called King Lear. People could enjoy all the theatrics of how it was presented because they all knew the story very, very well.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow.
You've been telling that story for many years, I believe.
Since I was a little girl, it was one of my grandfather's favorites.
I believe it was in my first introduction to storytelling in Favorites from the National Storytelling Festival.
Probably.
And so that's when I first encountered you.
It was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I've been making my living as a storyteller for almost 40 years now.
And
that is possible if you're very, very good and are willing to travel half your time.
At the time. And actually what you see is both joy, as Bill Hartley said, and imagination, and that's remarkable. It's just been great.
This program has just fled by. We have 30 seconds to thank our guest, Elizabeth Ellis.
You're
from
welcome.
Dallas,
It was
Texas,
a joy to be here.
And to thank you for coming.
Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next month. And thank you, Kate Dudding, for all you do.
Thank you, Joe Doolittle, for all you do.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again,